You're watching or listening to Strangers in Space, and for 5 minutes, we are going to be reviewing or letting our listeners review the last series of Doctor Who, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
And I'm Jim. That was easy. We managed to get that order correct.
Yeah, what the listener or viewer doesn't know is it took us three goes to start the video on this. So getting the order of the names right wasn't necessarily banged in, was it?
It could have gone wrong.
It could have gone disastrously wrong. Right. The reason I've got Jim in front of me is because he's not given his opinions yet. And the reason there's only two of us is because I don't want to dilute his opinions or the listeners' opinions any further than absolutely necessary, because we've got a fair few comments about season one. And of course, I want to find out what Jim thought of it. So I'm hoping he brings a bit of positivity to the occasion.
Yeah,
He's
I
looking a
will
bit
bring some. I will bring some. Not all, but some.
Okay, because the listeners certainly haven't brought any. What we shall do is have a general discussion about the season as a whole and then do the poll. So this is the listeners' poll. They voted in order of preference for their 7 stories of the season. We'd already done Church on Ruby Road. I wish I'd kept that for this now, but we already did it. So when we did the Tenant specials, so it didn't seem fair to include that again. And of course, I've included the last 2 as a single story because that's a 2-part story. So there are 7 stories that people voted for. But first, let's go through the listeners' comments and then let's find out what Jim thought after that. Tim Allman says, a curious season. Perhaps it was just too short and we had too many Dr. Light episodes, but it kind of whisked by without leaving too strong an impression. It was very, very, very RTD, conforming to all the templates and archetypes you saw during his first stint. I like Millie very much, and I'm sorry she's leaving the TARDIS scene, apart from what I imagine will be some Martha-esque cameos in the next series. I'm still not sure about Shooty. He's probably a bit too young and trendy for me. Perhaps I'll warm to him next year. All in all, this was a relatively fun watch, but I can't quite shake off the feeling that this is a show no longer aimed at viewers like me anymore, despite the relentless fan wankery on offer. Over to you, Jim.
Okay. A shorter comment this time from Harvey Unwin. Space Babies and the Devil's Cord are truly awful. The finale was a mess.
Alec Asnabel, I don't know how you pronounce this, but I'm going with Asnabel, who voted the stories actually in the exact order that the poll results came out, as did Suki Kark, and in fact, I think several other people, but it was only by the time I was getting to the end of it. And in fact, I have to admit that the order that I voted the stories in was the actual order that they've come out in the end. So I'm not going to
I
give any.
demand a recount.
I'm not going to give any spoilers away, but I got that bang on. Anyway, Alex says, and apologies for getting your name wrong, but a troubled season. You could almost see what it was going for if you squinted, but hampered by RTD's obvious distaste for sci-fi and sci-fi concepts, and by the confusing rug pulls and mystery game playing with actual narrative weight, something Moffat never actually did.
Andy Massey says, I'm still cleaning my teeth as a result of the taste of the finale left. So here I go.
Nice.
Overall, this season it wasn't really Doctor Who for me. Gatwa has a limited range and that doesn't dominate any of the scenes. Yeah, some of his lines some of the lines are the Doctor, but it's all sad and crying and he never is the centre of the episode. He follows. Okay, Sutek was the dog on the lead, but the Doctor was pretty much the same. He gets angry and punches something, and then Mel gets a bit of kibble and leads him to a Vespa.
Matthew Maisie says, sadly, one of my least favourite seasons of Doctor Who. Poor structure and left with many what, hi, why feelings and all the crying.
Ian Charles enjoyed the season, apart from Space Babies, which was awful, but almost every story could have been improved. Empire of Death, part 1 was real fun, part 2 was meh, pulling its placing down. Clearly had chunks edited out, which made it less cohesive, probably to allow the extended Ruby's mum goodbye scene. Probably not the right call.
Jeff Waddell says, not one of these will I watch again. I think for the first time, the lead role has been miscast.
Wow. Ben Jones, what a strange season. Constantly lurching between fun, engaging, and cringe-inducing. At the time of broadcast, I ranked The Legend of Ruby Sunday highest, but my God, its conclusion dragged it down. A parody of Doctor Who's tendency to be better at setting up mysteries and resolving them. Now, only its first episode saves it from last place. Through some smoke and mirrors, 73 Yards got away with the above tendency, whilst giving the impression of a good story well told, because the mystery was elegant and thrilling, and the viewer is invited to resolve the puzzle. Feels odd putting The Devil's Chord first, given the poor representation of the Beatles, and the terrible song at the end. I've no problem with the show turning into a musical, but this needed a decent example of the genre to work, and probably an in-story explanation, which wouldn't have been hard to provide, given the reality-warping nature of the story. Right, I'm going to peek behind the curtains. I've just got to move over the thing. Murray Gold, sure as hell, can't write songs. But it felt like a complete story. It was lurid, entertaining, poignant, and audacious, and beat 73 Yards by having the Doctor in it.
Luke Hammond says, not my kind of Doctor Who, I'm afraid. Too rushed and focused on a gimmick of the week to give much time for the character beats and texture that RTD excelled at first time round. His resolutions often made no sense, but I didn't care while I was enjoying the narrative. With far too many things now being thrown at the screen and little sense of grounding or depth, it feels like Russell perhaps has a bit too much control for the show's own good. Ncuti is a perfectly good actor and Millie has been strong too, but personally, I like my Doctors a little less cool and human.
Ralph Burton, no real clunkers, but no real classics either. A season of consistent quality, if inconsistent tone. I keep changing my mind on the order of the stories, though. This is a very difficult season to rank.
Phil Markham says, overall, a mixed start to the Disney era. At times, felt it was just RTD's greatest hits. Eventually, Ncuti settled into the role, but still is lacking some of the charm of previous Doctors and just needs to stop bloody crying. And Millie has been brilliant throughout the whole arc of her character's story.
And the final one on the general comments is Thomas Joseph Clifford. 73 Yards is possibly my favourite story ever. Dot and Bubble was superb. Rogue I love. Legend of, hugely exciting. I also loved Boom, enjoyed Devil's Chord, Space Babies and Empire. Loved the whole season.
Well, a positive note to end
at the end, yeah.
But overall, not really that positive, the listeners' comments. I wonder, obviously, because we on this podcast, generally speaking, have probably got, I would imagine, because I don't know what people think of us outside of what we hear. I imagine we've got a reputation as a sort of pro-Moffat podcast. So I imagine the kind of people we attract to listen to us are probably more inclined to like the Moffat stories more than the Russell T Davies ones. Obviously, that's a generalization, but I'm guessing from the listeners' comments there that probably there's some truth in that, because it mostly didn't sound all that happy with RTD's work. I'm going to throw a thought your way before I ask you what you thought of the season, Jim. And that's about, because I was listening to a podcast, and I'm not going to name check Strictly Come Hamster because I'm not advertising other people's podcasts, but they did Christopher Eccleston Series 1 last week, and I was listening to it this morning, and a thought occurred to me while they were talking about Bad Wolf Parting of the Ways, and that's this. Bad Wolf Parting of the Ways works really, really, really well, I think. I think it's a terrific bit of television, but also if you pull at the sort of strings that tie it together, even just a tiny bit, the whole thing unravels because it's absolute nonsense. It's clear that what RTD has done is just take a bunch of ideas, a bunch of visual ideas, a bunch of moments, a bunch of things that he thought, oh, this would be great in Doctor Who, and he's just sort of thrown them all together without an awful lot of thought about whether they fit. And I think the fact that some kind of alchemy just made those two episodes work so well has kind of been a thorn in the programme's side, because I think, and this is especially true of his stories, but it's not just true of his stories. I think it's true of some of the Moffat ones and some of the Chibnall ones too, that became, because it was so successful, a kind of template for Doctor Who in the modern era, where people will look at the ideas and they'll look at the visuals and they'll look at sort of storytelling beats, and not necessarily about whether they're appropriate to the story that's being told. And so sometimes you'll throw a lot of stuff at the screen that shouldn't really be there, just because it's so good that you can't not throw it at the screen, but it doesn't always fit. So sometimes the sort of visual whiz bang of the stories undermines the actual stories themselves. And I think it stems back to just how well the Parting of the Ways worked, really. So bearing in mind, that's a thought that I've just thrown at you. A, do you think there's any truth in that? But mostly B, what do you think of Ncuti Gatwa's first series?
Well, firstly, I think there is a lot of truth in that. I was never a fan of the first RTD run, really. I find it a bit kind of popcorn TV, in the same way you get popcorn movies. There are bangs and flashes, there are nice character moments and various other things and nice visuals, but it feels like there's a kind of narrative structures. There's no scaffolding. It seems to me sometimes this stuff is just hurled at the screen. And when you read the writer's tale, you think, well, maybe we can't see that with your background, JL. But,
there's somebody who's just about to turn 10 knocking on the door of the room. I got to tell you, if he doesn't stop knocking, he's not going to turn 10.
Ooh, 3 knocks.
He's gone.
What does that tell you?
He's gone. Sorry about that. Go away! Now he's laughing.
Parenting for beginners from jail cell.
He knows exactly what he's doing. He's trying to get a reaction.
Well, he's got one, hasn't he? Let's face it.
Yes. I think he's being moved on now. Where were we?
He's just been chloroformed outside the door.
Yeah, if he hasn't, he will be.
That's parenting tip 2.
Yeah. This whole thing has been picked up by my microphone, so it still continues. Can you hear it?
I can. We can all hear it.
Right. Let's get back to Doctor Who, shall we?
Sorry, I was saying about the writer's tale. When you get a feeling like maybe there wasn't time to
now the dogs have joined in.
Your household is trying to destroy this.
Yes.
Yeah, you wonder if there's enough time for him to do any more than just hurl stuff at the screen. But, like you say, if you do that and it works and people like it, then maybe you take less time in the future because you think, well, there was an alchemy that came out of my being rushed. Yeah. Like in the way in classic Who, where, constraints often led to, great moments of improvisation or whatever, either on the screen or off.
Death, yeah.
For instance, so maybe he works or thinks he works better flying by the seat of his pants. But the problem is when you watch seasons like that and you get used to them, that's okay and it's popular. And then you get Moffat, who does structure things properly and seeds things correctly and pays off, not to everybody's satisfaction, but pays off eventually to most things. And then you get kind of used to that level of care in storytelling. Then you get Chris Chibnall, which I'm slightly undecided about, and then you get back to RTD. Then you notice the cracks. I think.
Yeah. I think Chris Chibnall's good at the structure. I don't think his episodes felt like they had the emotional impact.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think
Yeah. I think Moffat's the perfect sort of in between point, really.
Yeah.
But so Russell T Davies's second go around then, what did you make of this first series then?
Well, it's popcorn TV. Like it's still popcorn TV. I was kind of hoping for something a little more, really, because of the stuff that he's done, like years and years and stuff that he's done in between, which some astonishing pieces of TV he's done in between his two stints on the show. I didn't feel like he kind of learned anything. This is coming from me, who couldn't. I couldn't write a screenplay to save my life, but yeah, it seems to me that whatever he's kind of, those intervening years might as well not have been there in terms of what he's doing for Doctor Who, because this could easily have just been tagged on to the end of Tennant, and in fact you've even got a bridge between the Tennants with which to do that. So yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, there's a lot of RTD's episodes I've only ever seen once, because I've had no desire to watch them again. I've only seen this series, each episode, once.
Really,
so this is a kind of a lukewarm take. I mean, there are others. Some of them I will watch again, but some of them I certainly won't. So to me, it was kind of. So, in terms of Doctor Who, just to give a bit of my background, or where I currently am, really, I'm a fan of 60s and 70s Doctor Who. I like 80s Doctor Who, and I watch current Doctor Who. The only difference with that really is the Moffat years, because I felt fully engaged with those. Right. I found them frustrating at times, and he annoyed the hell out of me at times. However, I was watching with my full attention, and I was fully engaged in it. And I haven't been since. And this hasn't really, apart from the odd moment or a couple of episodes, really haven't brought me back to a stage where I feel like the show is aimed at me or something that I'm particularly invested in.
Having said that, though, see, the way I sort of feel about it, the way I kind of feel about it is sort of two-pronged. One, I think there's a bottom line of entertainment that the modern series has never failed to achieve, basically. Even the worst episodes of the modern series, I think, are perfectly fine, entertaining pieces of television, frankly. I don't think there's a single episode that doesn't achieve at least that. But then the other thing I think is, because it's Doctor Who, we obviously look at it with too much attention. But by the same token, I think the fact that it is Doctor Who means that even if we're not particularly enjoying it, we still will give it our attention. Yeah. Because we can't help ourselves. So I think sometimes our criticisms of it they're valid criticisms of it, but they're only valid criticisms in as far as we are fans. And I think for regular viewers, sometimes those things just don't matter. So and clearly that's true, I think, insofar as Russell T Davies is concerned, because everything I said about Parting of the Ways has probably actually had a bad legacy for Doctor Who, because it means that, like you were saying, sometimes Russell T Davies will just throw it together by the seat of his pants and everybody loves it, or at least that's how it sometimes feels, and so it works. But actually, as fans, we're thinking, no, write a proper story. No, seed the things that you want to pay off and pay off the things that you've seeded, and so on and so forth. Most people watching it just aren't looking at it like that. So there's this sort of weird dichotomy between being a fan who's not enjoying it so much, but still sometimes trying to step back and say, right, but even so, it's still just entertaining television at the end of the day, really. Yeah. And so, go on.
Sorry, I was going to say, as a result of feeling less proprietorial about the show, it doesn't make me angry anymore or anything like that. All the stuff, with possible previous regenerations of Doctor, with during the Chibnall era, some people are furious about that. For me, it's just, well, okay, that's what they're doing now. I feel a bit more sort of Doyle's in. What's the phrase? When you're either the Watsonian or Doyleist or whatever. I'm in fact, I'm beginning to think I was quite, as a boy, actually fairly Doyleist about the show, and I have been ever since. So, but I went through that stage where everything had to be exactly right. Everything had to fit in with continuity. I don't feel like that at all now, and I think if it's your sandbox, you can play in it and you can do what you like. That won't change necessarily.
Yeah, that's what Terrance Dicks did, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, I'm at a stage where, because I feel more Doyleist, I'm quite able to pick and choose what is continuity and canon and what isn't, and just enjoy it in those terms. So there's nothing, I didn't get worked up about anything during this series, so I was able to sit back as perhaps a slightly more casual observer might, and just watch them for the entertainment that they, undoubtedly were, like you say.
And actually, those things, the sort of continuity things, like the bi-generation and Chris Chibnall doing the Timeless Child, I think those are the best things that they've done. Frankly, I think there's this weird thing going on with Russell T Davies and with Chris Chibnall, where I think the Doctor Who that they write isn't necessarily the best or most entertaining Doctor Who that we've had. And clearly this goes back to being me being, like you say, more engaged with Moffat. But by the same token, I think actually the ideas are terrific. It's just the execution sometimes of the ideas. I think actually, I think my overview of this series of Doctor Who is he's come up with 7 terrific ideas for stories, and the stories themselves weren't exactly brilliant. Some of them were better than others. Some of them I really didn't like very much at all, and some of them I really quite liked. But I think the actual ideas that underpin those stories are great ideas that could have made really brilliant stories, and sometimes went very far away from that. And actually, as far as casual viewers are concerned, I think this is a series of Doctor Who that really has 7 very distinct sort of things going on in it. The space babies, and then one where music comes alive, and then one where the Doctor's stuck on a landmine, and then one where the Doctor disappears altogether, and then one that's about AI, sort of social media. I think they're all great ideas for stories, but just sometimes they didn't necessarily come off. To which, shall we get to the story that came in last and talk about that? Shall we
Let's
go through
do that.
the stories?
Yeah.
I have to say, before we actually get in, insofar as the voting is concerned, so you would expect the story that came in the middle to be on 50% of the vote share, and then above it to be above, and below it to be below. But the story that came in exactly 4th out of the 7 is several percent below 50%. We'll get to that in a minute, which kind of shows that the top 3 stories were very definitely people's favourite 3 stories. The order itself varied from one person to another, but generally speaking, the top 3 stories were people's 3 favourites. The next 3 stories were, generally speaking, much less people's favourites, and the story that came bottom just absolutely came rock bottom.
Nobody's favourite.
Yeah, by a country mile. I don't think anybody's going to be surprised to find, but on 7.8%, it's of course Space Babies. Andy Massey, who voted it 8th, because some people didn't get that I'd put the last 2 episodes up as a 2-parter for a single vote. So some people, and when that happened, I took the average of the 2 so that the thing would balance out. But Andy Massey voted this his 8th favourite episode of the year. He said, I liked the line, "Oh Poppy, oh Popsicle, nobody grows up wrong. You are what you are, and that is magnificent," which did link back to something Ian Chesterton said about the Daleks. They're afraid of you because you're different from them. But clearly he didn't like the story much because he voted it last.
Well, I think 8th out of 7 stories is about right for us, to be honest.
You're not wrong.
David Yoon, 7th, the worst story I've ever seen.
And Graham Leggett voted it as high as 6th and said a bit daft. Jim, what did you make of Space Babies?
I didn't like it. It's like RTD. I always found that I never liked the first episodes. I know Disney is counting this as episode 2, aren't they, because of the Christmas? But if we're looking at the season as we perceive it, this is the first story, and they're normally light and fluffy, and they're normally something I don't particularly like. And maybe that episode and the one after is ones I'll have to sit through before the good stuff starts, which happened to me this season as well. The babies were naff. I used to like babies till I had one, and now I quite like babies. So I didn't like these. What's going on? Why they? It was an adequate explanation of why they're talking, and they're mentally sort of advanced, yet physically they aren't. And I know whatever the message there didn't get through, and I know there's a kind of abortionist thing here as well, isn't there?
I don't think there is. I think people have misread what the message is with this episode. So, and this is the first sort of series of Disney Plus Doctor Who, as it were. But I think Russell T Davies had started writing and started working on these stories before Disney Plus came in. So I don't think you can necessarily assume that he's writing it knowing that it's going out on Disney Plus. I don't think this is about Roe versus Wade so much as it's about the British government putting a cap on child benefits at 2 children.
At 2 children, yes.
And saying if you have a third or a fourth children, you don't get benefits for them. So all of a sudden, the amount of money you've got per child, especially if you're sort of at lower end of the income tree, I think that's what this is about. I think this is about the British state saying, no, you don't deserve to have more than 2 children. If you have more than 2 children, that's your own lookout. Bugger off. I think that's really what this is about. And I think the line in there about, because there's a line in there about refugees, isn't there? And it's not strictly true, but I think Russell T Davies is trying to make a point. And he says, in order to claim refugee status, you have to actually physically turn up at the place where you want to claim it. Now, clearly, there are ways in which that's not true. But I think the point he's trying to make is a political point to the people who are trying to stop that from being a thing and saying to them, no, let the people come and then decide whether they deserve that status. So I think this is very British led in terms of its politics. And I think people have misunderstood it.
Yeah, well, quite so. Like I say, I only saw it once and I couldn't really engage. I thought there was something going on there. I mean, there's the issue of abandonment, isn't there, which just keeps cropping up, particularly the first half of this series. I mean, these babies have clearly been abandoned up to a point, haven't they? But again, talking about RTD, a monster made of snot and a spaceship that looks like an arse. That farts its way across space. I mean, this is this season's sort of belching wheelie bin and farting aliens, isn't it? Which I thought was a misstep in the Eccleston season, that he just aimed it wrongly, and I thought there were course corrections after that. It's just a little bit too juvenile for a family audience. Yeah, here we are again.
Yeah.
And he seems to have done the same thing in the same place in the series. If you're talking about the wheelie bin, at least.
I didn't mind it then, and I don't mind it now. But going back to what I said, I think the ideas in this are fine. The idea of these babies being sort of trapped in these sort of toddler bodies, but actually having aged to sort of 5 or 6, I think it is, sort of in their heads, and so being able to, I quite like the ideas. I just thought the execution of it felt really lacking in ambition. It was just, let's set the whole thing in a room, and then maybe we'll have another room in a corridor, and then let's have a character who doesn't turn up for half the episode, and the explanation is, well, I didn't really want to see the babies die.
It's limp, isn't it?
Yeah, there's just a lot of this which didn't seem to have ambition, or it just didn't feel thought through. It just felt like an episode that was, and I hate this expression because I don't think this expression usually carries much weight, but it felt like a first draft that just needed somebody to go back to it and say, right, what are the things that are working and what can we tweak to make the other things work better? And it just didn't feel like anybody had done that.
Yeah, and watching the series as a whole, this is extraordinary. This is the one he led with, I think.
Yeah.
Or if he was going to lead with the idea, then you have to make your first episode a winner, don't you? If you're trying to attract a huge new audience, and I think, like you say, it didn't seem enough care in it for that to have been the case, really.
I think this works brilliantly, like 5th or 6th.
Yeah.
So that halfway through the series, suddenly you've got a next time trailer talking babies. That's like, I mean, I think so. People have said, "Oh, talking babies." I think talking babies is a selling point because it's one of those things where you're going, there are several different ways of looking at it. You're either thinking, "What the hell," or else you're thinking, "How are they going to do that?" So you want to see it for the special effects, whatever. You're either in the fiction, you want to know why there are talking babies, or outside of the fiction, you want to know how they're doing talking babies. But either way, I think talking babies is the mid-series, let's get everybody's attention episode. Not the one that you throw away at the start before you've sort of defined what the series is going to feel like.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, in 6th place, massive leap up from 7.8% to 33.3%. Graham Leggett voted this one 7th, said squandered the concept. It's the devil's chord.
Andy Massey.
Yeah, go on.
So Andy Massey said 5th, need to rewatch and perhaps deserves to be higher. Love the use of the sonic and enforcing silences. The sonic enforcing silences, maybe. And love the piano stuff by Ruby. But did she express any ability before or after? Also, that song, FFS. I'll leave the watcher and listener to interpret those 3 letters.
I think it's a musical expression, isn't it? You see on the corner of
Fortissimo.
Something like that.
Yes.
The devil's chord then, Jim. So was this as bad as Space Babies, or was this a bit better?
It was, for me, it was bad in completely different ways. I didn't enjoy this one at all. I'm a big fan of the Beatles, and I was quite interested in this, but also apprehensive to see how that might be treated. The Beatles were laughable, I thought, in this. The Ruttles, the
oh yeah,
Eric Idle and Neil Innes's sort of spoof. I mean, it looks like that they had some pictures of them that they cast from, not the Beatles. I mean, McCartney was just hysterically bad as a piece of casting.
I think they went for actors who could sing or play, and were from Liverpool, rather than any other concern. I don't think I mind. I tell you what, I think would have made that better. If they'd have had bigger parts in the story, which gave you time to get used to them, to adjust to them, and to accept them. But as it was, they're only in like 2 scenes, so you never get time to adjust to them or accept them.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen dramatizations of the Beatles, The Birth of the Beatles. It's a slightly obscure film, but it's quite good. And a couple of nights ago, Backbeat as well. Backbeat as well. Yeah, I've seen that as well. And a couple of nights ago, watched Nowhere Boy. About the young Lennon. Thomas Sangster turns up as Paul McCartney, which is just as bad as this, to be honest.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, it was interesting. It really had a whiff of Yesterday about it. In the sense that the Beatles were there, but they kind of weren't there, and the music certainly wasn't. Which is an interesting to riff on, and look at it from a kind of alternative dimension or alternative timeline type approach. But that wasn't the worst thing for me. The worst thing for me was the maestro, who I found absolutely unbearable to a point where I almost turned off towards the end. The scene when there's the 3 of them fighting in it. What is it, kind of like in a kind of sports hall or something? I can't remember now. Or the music room, isn't it? Probably.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. See, I thought that if you'd have ended up at that point where the characters played like that, that would have been fine. But the character started like that, carried on like that, and ended like that. And so the performance just felt like it was all, to use a music metaphor, all on one note.
Yes. Yeah, well, so there's no light and shade to the master. I'm sick to death of wacky villains. John Smith Master, Missy, the Toy Maker, and not just Doctor Who. Moriarty and Sherlock was the same. The Klaus Bang Dracula was the same. It's just, I'm sick of these. All I see is the actor when they have characters like this. I can't believe the character. All I see is someone having a lot of fun, and I wish I was having more fun watching them. And I got exactly that with Chinks Monsoon. I got nothing against drag artists. I mean, I'm not interested in it. It doesn't do anything for me. Yeah. But I'm not one of these people who won't let them read to kids or anything stupid like that. But it's just. I mean, I found it literally unbearable, and I almost turned off. What I did think was really interesting was it a minute and a half of silence?
Yeah.
Partly because I thought, Christ, the TV's gone wrong. And then I worked out what they're actually doing is really good. And, of course, that was 90 seconds without fucking Jinx Monsoon hogging the screen. So, that was my favourite moment for many different reasons. But, yeah, I mean, as a whole, I mean, I'd have to really gird my loins if I was ever going to attempt to watch this one again.
The Devil's Chord is so all of the other episodes I watched by myself and then watched with my son later on. So I've seen all of the episodes twice, except this. This was the only one where I said, no, you can watch that by yourself.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Right.
He, by the way, he loved Space Babies. That's his favorite episode of the series.
Well, there you are. There's something for everyone.
But he absolutely hated The Devil's Chord.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and don't get me started on the song and dance at the end. He really didn't like that.
By that stage, I wasn't bothered, and yet, running across the zebra crossing,
Yeah.
Abbey Road, and it lighting up. By that stage, I've checked out anyway. So, do what you like.
I don't think it was the fact that they were singing and dancing. I think it was the fact that Russell T Davies didn't bother to put the explanation in, and there was an explanation. The fact that there was supposed to be this sort of, he said afterwards, I think, or I'm sure this is attributed to him, that there was some kind of residual energy from the maestro that caused people to spontaneously sing and dance for like a short period of time after the villain was vanquished, which seemed to me like you could have thrown that in, just 2 seconds to throw that in, and there's a sort of 9-year-old, well, about to turn 10-year-old, just gone to bed, who would have, I'm sure, found that song and dance number at the end acceptable. But because it just turned up without any explanation, and so didn't feel like it was part of the story, I guess, felt like it was extraneous to the story, it didn't work, because he was like, well, the story's finished, what's this, I think.
Yeah. And
but then, like I say, I wasn't in the room with him, so I couldn't say for sure.
Well, as someone said in the feedback, Murray Gold can't write a song either.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, spend a bit more cash and get a Beatles song maybe at the end, but yeah.
Right, in 5th place, and being that this is a non-Russell T Davies one, and also given that one of the people on this has been working on Loki, although as a director rather than a writer, so I'm not sure if that's quite telling. But this is one that I kind of expected people to like more. But actually, on 42.9%, Rogue didn't really go down terrifically well at all. Andy Massey voted it 6th and said chemistry between the two leads? Maybe, but it was over a couple of hours. Again, the Doctor was submissive in the scenario and the actual kiss. He couldn't even spot that Ruby was faking it.
Graham Leggett, 5th. Premise good, execution good, but just didn't grab me.
Yeah, I think that was it for me. I just wasn't grabbed by this. What about you?
Again, this was one of the most popcorny ones in it, I think, really. I mean, I didn't have any problem like I did with the two we've just discussed at all. I thought this is fine. This is interesting. I've seen a couple of episodes of Bridgerton because my daughter's been watching it. I didn't enjoy them. I didn't kind of see the point in them or what they were trying to do, really. But I don't think we need it to be hammered over our heads that this is a bit like Bridgerton, unless you were just trying to get over the race issue and because of the colourblind casting of Bridgerton. Because this is not unlike one of the ones who will come to. This is not about race. So maybe they're just trying to diffuse that before it came to it. But I quite like Rogue. I thought it was a less annoying version of Captain Jack, which is Captain Jack by a non-cancelled actor. So, if you can't get Captain Jack, get somebody who's who's still.
But did you not find? Sure, I just found him, and so I've not seen him in anything else. And I think people were bringing what they thought of him from other things to their appreciation of this, possibly. It just felt like a completely empty space to me.
He's understated. He's very understated, isn't he?
Incredibly, yeah.
Yeah, I've only seen him in Glee because, again, my daughter, we watched a lot of the early parts of Glee together. He's quite good in that. I mean, he's an unpleasant character, but he plays it very well. And yeah, it might be a bit of that, a bit of goodwill from that. Stretching into this, he's fine. I mean, he's nowhere near as annoying to me as Captain Jack, but then he's not pitched anywhere near where he is, so that makes him kind of less interesting as well. Indira Varma I thought was great until she turned into a bird, which she gave up acting for the rest of the show, I thought. So that was a bit weird, and the ending bit with. Oh no, we can't we can't get Ruby out of the triangle. She's there for good. Oh, tears. She's gone. Oh my God. What have I done? And then Rogue just pulls her out and gets in himself. Just think, well, hang on a minute. If it was that easy, maybe someone should have mentioned that earlier.
And and then it ends on a sort of Adric note of no, we can't go back, or in Adric's case, it's no, we can't go back and save him. But in this case, it's
his
no, we can't
contracts run
find
out.
him. Yeah, we don't know where he's gone. It's like, no, this. Do you know what I think? So I didn't get this on the episode where we reviewed it, but when I watched it again afterwards with my little boy, I think the thing that sort of struck me then was because Rogue is so understated, I think that makes the Doctor feel really predatory.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, he's still certainly making all the running because Rose just kind of deflecting quite a lot. Trying to not physically push him back, but he's not interested to start with, and he's not really giving much away because he's so understated. Yeah, maybe it does. Again, I've only seen it once, but
yeah. And I've got to tell you one thing else that I've spotted as well is that the next episode where the Doctor snogs somebody will be a character called maybe Robe in an episode called Robe, because he snogged Rogue in Rogue and Rose in Rose. So if there's an episode which is just Row something, and the lead character is named after the same name as the episode, then that's bound to be a love interest for the Doctor, right? That just seems to be how Russell T Davies does it.
Well, let's hope it's not Rohypnol. That would be too much.
Moving swiftly on.
I just wanted to say something about the kiss. I mean, if you're going to cast a black and gay actor, then this should be in there somewhere. And it's interesting that the outrage here was the gayness, not the blackness, if you like, isn't it, in here? Whereas, of course, the blackness is addressed elsewhere. So, again, I'm not interested in the Doctor fancying people, but again, I'm not outraged by it, and straight or gay doesn't bother me either. So it was something I expected to happen at some point, and it did.
Yeah, fair enough. Right, on 46.9%, and there's a bunch of comments about this. In fourth place, this is the two-parter that finished the series. Avid W. Goon votes the whole thing seventh, says Legend pretty good, Empire easily the worst finale of New Who.
Andy Massey's, I haven't read this yet, but I can see he's split it into two. Yeah. Legend of Ruby Sunday 3rd. Great fun, great foreplay. Knows what bits to tickle.
He's back to Rogue, isn't he?
Yes, we're back in the same territory. I will even forgive the fact that Rose could have been replaced by a hat stand. She hugs and investigates car break-ins, but hangs around after the evacuation of all key personnel. Then, Empire of Death 7th. After the foreplay, a drunken fumble. How the fudge have we gone almost an entire run of the show with Sutek hitching a ride? The Doctor came over a selfish git with the fact he had investigated her history, and then they found it, and Ruby was happy, and her father was also found, and she was in such a positive place, and he threw out his Mardy face and dumped her. Sorry, I didn't read that very well.
No, I think Andy Massey's pen is running away from him. I'm running away with him. But I think we get the message.
Yeah, she's in a positive place, and he says, "Right, see you then," doesn't he? Also, the prick teasing of seeing Susan, the Doctor's line about, I should see her again sometime, was trolling the fans. Just a mess.
Oh, yeah, the next one. This came as a private message, so I'm not sure it was meant to be read out. And so I am going to read it out, but I'm not going to give the name of the person who sent it to me just in case. So if they did want it read out, they'll know who they are. But this person votes it 6th and says, the more I think about the finale, the more bitterly disappointed I am.
Next, the legendary Suki Kark. 4th. First part was great. Second part left a lot of the plot somewhere, but not in the episode. It's on the writer's room floor somewhere. Probably.
Yeah. I mean, it's around here somewhere.
I think I swept it up, thinking about it.
Graham Leggett votes this one 4th and says the first part was dragged down by the second part.
Yeah, the common theme, isn't it? Nigel Webb second. The scene with the woman with the spoon was one of the most beautiful scenes I've seen in Doctor Who. Masterfully written, directed, and acted. The final episode was stunning, especially on second watch. But all right, should I say the next bit? It's giving it
Oh
away.
yeah. No, it's all
Yeah,
right.
but 73 yards is up there with the best ever Doctor Who episodes ever made. So
In other words,
we know where Nigel's going to land later on.
but in other words, he voted this one second, despite loving it, because there was one he liked even more. I think
Even
he's
more.
always basically saying.
Exactly.
Ian Charles said, I think there's a linking scene that's missing, though, to explain why the Doctor went there to meet the woman, so it seems to be out of place. And actually, that came up. That Ross T. Davies said some bits had been cut out of that episode. And I don't think he said exactly what, but I think it's mostly assumed that there was a linking scene there. But I actually, as a viewer, I thought that was fine. I don't think you necessarily need linking scenes sometimes. You make the link in your head, don't you? They need to find something, and so they're at the place where they think they can find it. You don't need any more explanation than what you really get on scene. So I was fine with that. That was a little bit like I predicted the week before. I didn't predict. I said it may be that in order for this story to take place, there might have to be a 3 months later caption or something.
Yeah.
And I think that scene was effectively the sort of equivalent of a maybe not 3 months later, but maybe 3 weeks later or something, because they've been looking for this thing. Anyway, Ian Charles goes on to say, agree, the scene itself was superb acting. He votes third. Part 1 was real fun. Part 2 was meh, pulling its place down.
Steve Powell, second. Part 1 doing some very heavy lifting here.
And David Ewan votes it first and says Part 1 magnificent. Part 2 Jem. So this is the first sort of, I mean, we've had the giggle, which is kind of a finale, but it's only a finale, is a sort of 3-part miniseries sort of thing. So it's not quite the same. So this is properly the first finale of Russell T Davies's second go through. I mean, we've already spoken a fair bit about how we think he does it, but did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy the first one more than the second one, I suppose?
Yeah, I did much more. Yeah. I thought it was a great setup. I really like the time window stuff. I like the idea, and I like the way it came over on screen. It really felt like we were doing something a bit different. That the resolution to those scenes.
Do you know what? Just on the time window thing, that felt like Warrior's Gate done really nicely.
Yeah, it's had that kind of feel about it, didn't it?
Yeah.
It's interesting. Yeah, I really like that. I like this current setup with Unit. I think Kate's much better than she was. Having seen her in other stuff and then seeing her now, I think the reason that I found her so wooden when she first joined the series, I think that's an acting choice, to be someone who's kind of scientifically detached and kind of militarily detached from things. I think she was trying to step back and be deliberately less emotional, as befits a position. I don't think it worked, and I think what we have now is much better. So I was glad to see her. I really like the new scientific advisor, the guy with the pizza.
Who was there because the one from earlier, whose name escapes me, was unavailable. I think she was on the stage somewhere in a theatre run or something, so she couldn't make it.
Yeah. I thought he's really good. Really nice comic timing and stuff he had. I thought I'd like to see him come back.
I suspect we'll probably now go between the two of them. I think because the other one's back next. Yeah, I think the other one's back next year, so I'm hoping that we actually sort of alternate between the two.
Yeah,
or even have them both together, actually.
Yeah. I'm sure that will happen at some point. Yeah, it was good. As a classic fan, it was good to see Sutek back. I'm not sure he's the right one to bring back, really. I mean, if you got somebody saying he's in hell, and we got 666 comes up as a kind of motif at one point. I mean, you think that would be the Beast, wouldn't you? The Impossible Planet, rather than Sutek, really, if you want to go that satanic.
Yeah, it feels like Russell T Davies came up with the story and then said, what character can I put in to make this story work? Oh, let's put Sutek in, and made the wrong choice. But almost certainly he actually started with the idea of Sutek and then just wrote a story that was far more suitable for someone else. It just beggars belief if that I'm almost certain that's how it happened. And yet that beggars your belief, doesn't it? If he'd started with the idea of doing Sutek, why didn't he write a story that fits Sutek?
Yeah. And the whole, I mean, this would have worked no better actually with the Beast, but the whole thing about anagrams. I mean, Sutek brings you his gift of word games. And you think, well, it's not really his style, is it?
No, I didn't mind that. I thought that was fun. And for the one-time audience, I think the anagram thing probably was a lot of fun. But then again, why would they have been interested in the anagram of Sutek, right? But I think that the way it unfolded on screen was probably the fun part of it.
Yeah, it's typical RTD. It's like a fun in exactly the moment it happens,
and never before.
And then as soon as you think about it, doesn't really work. Also,
I found the Sutek's gift thing that they kept repeating irritating. That was not a catchphrase. That was just a thing somebody said.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've turned it into a catchphrase just has diminished all of its effect, really.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that completely. Also, was there some idea that the toy maker and Maestro and Sutek are related in some way?
Well, I mean, the toy maker and Maestro are certainly in the dialogue. Maestro says that the toy maker's her parent. I think it's parent rather than father. And then there's another character who's Maestro's child, who presumably is coming back next year. I'm not sure whether Sutek is supposed to be related to them so much as just so as we consider them gods, they consider him a god. So it's another step up the ladder of godliness or something. I'm not sure. It's Russell T Davies logic, isn't it? So
I can't imagine what Christmases are like with the Maestro and the toy maker. Bloody nightmare. And I can't see Sutek putting up with either of those two either. You know, you just turn them to dust after about 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of good to see Sutek. I wish he hadn't been a big jackal throughout. I think there would have been room for him to sort of be in his sort of person form, which I think was effective enough, and probably would be even more effective than he redid it today.
The makeup they put on the minions was fantastic.
Oh, that was really good.
If they could have found a way of doing Sutek that was in line with those, that could have been amazing.
Yeah, they were really effective. Yeah,
because the problem was you had Gabriel Wolf's voice, but between Gabriel Wolf's voice and the sort of big cartoon CGI jackal, you couldn't connect the two in your head.
No, I mean, thank God the jackal wasn't lip syncing Gabriel Wolf's voice. That'd be even worse. But I mean, I just thought, well, you got to assume that's sort of he's telepathically communicating. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a nice moment to have the jackal. But then I think going back into its sort of humanoid form would have been better. I
really enjoyed the jackal at the end of the first episode. But that was about as much of it as you needed to see.
Yeah, then he just reverts.
But then you couldn't do the dog thing with the lead at the end if you hadn't kept him as a jackal, could you?
Yeah, but that may be being no great loss. But
go on.
But that's kind of the first episode, isn't it? I mean, it does fall off a cliff. For me, I mean, all the stuff in the time when I was slightly spoiled by the pointing at the sign thing. I mean, for whose benefit is that? Does she know she's on CCTV when she's pointing at the sign? If she does, is that enough of a clue that she wants a child to be called that? I thought she'd call that because she was found on a Sunday in Ruby Street or wherever it was. Yeah.
Well, her parents are called Sunday, so it's not even that she's found on a Sunday.
Oh, they're actually called Sunday. Oh,
I think she should have been called Sunday because she was found on a Sunday. That seemed like the perfect things for me.
Yeah.
See, the worst thing about that for me was that, I mean, I think it's awful the moment when the words just appear on the sign. I think that's a terrible, terrible bit of television and such an anticlimax. But I think the thing that really, really kills that stone dead is when the doctor just goes, "Oh, she wanted to be called that." I'm like, how Did you
Bit of a
leap
leap.
to that? There is nothing in anything that we've seen that suggests that the reason that she's pointing that sign is because she wants that to be the baby's name. I mean, if it said High Street, well, is she going to point at the sign and say, "Oh, I'm a baby to be called High Street"? Why is that the conclusion that you leap to when she's pointing at the sign? It just beggared all belief.
Also, why is this young woman creeping around dressed like a Nazgul in that huge cape?
I think that's fair enough, because by 2004, this is 2004, isn't it? This takes place. By that time, there's already a lot of CCTV cameras. So I think you probably, if you're going to put a baby outside a church where it's likely that there might be CCTV, or somewhere along your journey there's going to be CCTV, I think you probably would wear something that covers your face or your head.
Yeah, but wouldn't that be that baseball cap and a hoodie, isn't it? It's not.
Yeah,
it's
maybe.
Not, you don't dress like someone
no.
from a witch's coven, do you? I mean, it's just
no. And that's fair, but it's an artistic choice, and I can forgive it that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a visual that doesn't really stand up to scrutiny, which is, you know, a bit of a theme here. I didn't buy the thing at all about Ruby's mum being ordinary, and that's why the whole thing. But why is Sutek interested in that, and how is Ruby making snow and all these other things that seem to indicate that she's not quite human, or has, you know, got powers that you wouldn't expect, and yet it all turns out that, you know, she's as ordinary as she could possibly be. Some people is lost somewhere, surely.
Some people have said, oh, the reason snow appears is because Sutek's there on the TARDIS making it snow around her whenever she mentions her mother or something. It's like, I don't think that really scans either, frankly.
Did he do that?
Yeah, no, I think the whole thing is Russell. And this is it, isn't it? Russell T Davies has basically said, I wanted people talking about it, and so I put in all this stuff pointing to Susan because I knew people would talk about it, and at the end I stripped it away and said no. And so I don't know if I said this on the air. I think I said this afterwards. See, at the time, I think we all thought, or certainly I thought, oh, we're going to see Susan at Christmas or next year or something, because there's been so much Susan talk that Russell T Davies cannot not put Susan in it now. And then it struck me, no, you've got 2 seconds of Susan coloured from the Daleks, haven't you, on screen? That's his payoff, isn't it? That's your lot.
Yeah.
I've got a horrible feeling now. That's it for Susan. Those 2 seconds of coloured footage is all we're going to see. I think he's really missed. I think if he doesn't have Susan in an episode, he's missed a trick, because I think that's a story really worth telling, that this young funky guy who's now the Doctor is the grandfather of this old woman. I think he's really missing a trick not telling that story. But I just can't see him telling it.
We set it all up perfectly,
I know,
to tell it, and then just walked off.
But he set it all up as a trick on the audience, didn't he? And that's it. I don't think it occurred to him that instead of setting it up as a trick on the audience, maybe he should actually follow through on it, because there's a much more interesting story to be told there than the one that he didn't tell in the end anyway.
And the casting of Susan Twist presumably is all part of that, isn't it? I mean, she's great as it happens, but I mean, that's not why she's cast. Presumably, she's cast.
Well, no, I said this, I think, on one of the episodes, because she's a Manchester actor. And obviously,
so he probably knows her well. Yeah,
he's probably known her for years, and I bet, like, in between leaving Doctor Who and coming back, at some point in that 10, 12 years, whatever it was, I bet at some point he looked at Susan Twist and said, "Do you know what?" And I bet that idea has been sitting in his head ever since. Yeah.
One good point I wanted to say about the Empire of Death was the emotional impact of Ruby finally meeting her biological mother, which I thought was Millie's best piece of acting throughout this, and actually I found really touching.
Right, yeah.
And it seemed slightly separate from everything else, but I think it worked. What I didn't like was the tone-deaf approach from RTD about how Carla would feel about this, and how Millie would just do all this right in front of her, and, you know, without thinking how she might be feeling about all this. It just seemed oversimplistic.
There should have been a conversation, even if it's just 2 lines. Like, even if it's just Carla saying something like, finally, I've been telling you for years that this moment would come, and finally it's happened. And then you'd understand that they've had these conversations, and these
Exactly.
conversations have been going. All you need is just one line like that, and that would have done it. But as it was, and also Russell T Davies made a couple of cardinal errors, because so one thing in the sort of adoptive community, I don't know what the proper expression is, but apparently it's a real no-no to describe your birth mother as your real mother, because your real mother is the person who's been bringing you up. And Russell T Davies does it twice in dialogue, calls the birth mother the real mother, puts those words in Millie Gibson's mouth. And apparently the sort of adoptee community was not very happy about that at all.
I didn't know that was a cardinal sin, but it jumped out at me as, you don't say that, surely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did see a lot of people complaining about it on Twitter afterwards. Yeah,
I'm not surprised.
And it's weird the way he can't. It's like he does this almost every year now, doesn't he? At the end of, see, again, going back to what I was saying about Parting of the Ways, where it went down so well that he just repeated sort of things from it afterwards, whether they work or not. At the end of Doomsday, he's got that entire section at the end for 10 minutes after the story's finished, where you find out what happens to the Rose and the Doctor afterwards. And he's obviously thought, well, that went down really well, because then he did a 15-minute sequence at the end of Journey's End, where the Doctor goes round all his old companions and says goodbye. And then he repeats that whole thing at the end of time. And then at the end of this, you've got a 12-minute section where Ruby finds out who her mother is. I just wish he'd integrated that into the story more, rather than have it as a separate section at the end. Because it just feels like the program just shifts from one thing to another.
Well, it felt
so
like
unnaturally, yeah.
Yeah, it is unnatural. It felt like, we don't want Millie at the beginning of the next series. We need to get rid of her quick, get her mum, get her out, sort of thing. That's what it felt like. It was kind of tacked on at the end in the way that it was. And as somebody said in the feedback, it's like the Doctor saying, you're kind of settled, see her. And then you understand why she's staying there, but he's a little bit brusque. And then I love you.
She clearly wants to keep traveling, but she just wants a couple of days of breathing space.
Yeah. Give me a moment, because I've just discovered my biological parents. And come back for me or something. But he's apparently not prepared to do that.
Somebody said, I read somewhere, that one of the reasons why the Doctor wanted to travel with her was because they're both orphans. And
foundlings.
the minute foundlings. And the minute she becomes no longer a sort of foundling, orphan, whatever, he loses interest. But I don't think that's how the actors play it. I don't think that's necessarily there. I think somebody's just reading that because that's the only explanation that fits.
Yeah, it's brusque, but it's not that brusque, is it?
No. He turns away in tears, and that seems to be. And the
well, he
actor,
gives he provides a front, doesn't he, where he kind of smiles and winks and all that, and then he's upset when she can't see him.
And the reason the actor plays it like that is because, insofar as Shuji Gatwa is concerned, his character is saying goodbye because he knows they have to part. Not because he wants to part, because no longer are they sort of equivalent to each other because of the foundling thing. So he's not playing it like this person suggested it might be. He's playing it weirdly. I can't. It doesn't. I don't think that works.
It's an odd scene. Also, the "I love you" from Ruby as she leaves was that a platonic love, or is it?
I think it's just Russell T Davies.
A rose love.
I think it's just Russell T Davies repeating himself, isn't he? Because it works so well between Rose and Tennant, where she says "I love you" and he's just about to, and the connection breaks. That was heartbreaking. So he thought, that was heartbreaking. I'll do it again. It doesn't work in different circumstances.
Without any of the scaffolding,
Yeah,
it's a very odd. It's a very odd episode. The first bit of the second episode, Gideon all the destruction and everything. However, once anyone more than Kate dies, I thought Christ had written Kate out. I thought, blimey, that's brave. And then a couple more go, and you think, all right, it's going to be a reset then. And then all the attention is lost.
And also, I think, and I'm not. So this is the finale of the series. It's 55 minutes long.
Mm.
The trailers promise action, and actually you get a short chase with a moped, and the entire rest of the episode is just people sitting around moping.
The Empire of Moping.
Yeah. Shall we move on?
Yep.
So I don't think these three are as contentious. So we've got a huge leap from where Legend of Ruby Sunday and Empire of Death were to the top three. And actually, these second and third are quite close together. And then there's another huge leap to the story that won by a country mile. In third place, on 65%, Dot and Bubble. Graham Leggett voted this one second. He says, I seem to have put two Dr. Light stories at the top of my list.
What does that say about you together? Andy Mess again, second. Great main character light episode. So 25% of the season had bugger all Doctor. Didn't spot the race until the end. My partner did. That means it works on a certain level. Then had RTD slag me off for not seeing the racism. I haven't watched any of those things. Yeah, what do you call them?
Unleashed.
Unleashed. Yeah, I don't want to because, yeah, I might do in the future sometime. I don't want to hear an explanation of something that you should be seeing on screen afterwards, particularly when they don't actually marry up, which is what I hear seems to be happening quite a lot.
Yes, there had been an awful lot. I spotted this straight away of Russell T Davies. I spotted this before even the first Tennant episode came out because he did it on the short Unleashed thing after the Davros thing. Remember, where he had to come on and explain what he was doing with Davros because you couldn't see from the actual skit itself why Davros was there, able-bodied. Russell T Davies had to explain it to us, and he's been doing that ever since. On this subject of the racism. So I was spoiled for this before I watched it. So I have no idea whether I would have spotted it or not. I have a feeling that I wouldn't necessarily have done so because it's a science fiction story set in the future on a colony, on a world which, although it resembles certain aspects of ours, is also very different in other respects. And it's a world that's governed by its own rules. And although he uses certain triggering phrases in the sort of discourse of the episode before the reveal, because he doesn't spell it out in the reveal. So for once, Russell T Davies is not spelling it out. And like I say, that's been his problem 2 or 3 times when you've been struggling to work out what's actually going on because he's not spelled it out. But because he doesn't spell it out at the end, even when I watched the second time with my little boy, I still wasn't entirely sure that all the scaffolding was there to support that ending. So it's easy to read the rest of the episode as leading to that ending when you know what that ending is. But having watched it twice, and like I say, I can't say for sure because I was spoiled for it. Having watched it twice, I'm still not entirely sure that was the only place that episode could have gone at the end. And to be fair to my little boy, when I said to him at the end, you do realise what happened there? He said, no, I've no idea why she was upset with the doctor. And when I tried to explain what racism was, this is a 9-year-old about to turn 10. He didn't understand my explanation and is still none the wiser as to what racism is. So it's good for the younger generation who just accept each other without thinking about it.
Yeah.
But on this then, do you remember, do you know if you spotted that? Or did it work? Did that work for you? And did the episode work for you? Because I think the rest of the episode's terrific, actually.
Yeah, the rest of the episode worked for me eventually. I mean, when it first started, I thought she was so unbearable. I thought, I don't think I can watch too much of this. But it's a great performance, because it hit the right buttons. I think it fails slightly in the fact that the Doctor and Ruby are trying to save this person who, I'd rather was just eaten by a slug, So you kind of think, well, I mean, it says a lot about the Doctor, even with what is revealed at the end, that he's so desperate to save people, no matter what they're like and no matter what they do. That says quite a lot about him, even with the intense provocation he gets at the end. But dramatically, I don't think it does work in the sense that there's this, really unpleasant individual who turns out to be even more unpleasant at the end. Yet you're, I think, supposed to be rooting for her. I never did, root for her at any point during it.
No, you root more for the bloke that's sort of the surrogate doctor character, actually, don't you? The
Yeah,
guy who's the dancer who
with the
turns up
daft
and
hair.
turns out to be all right.
Yeah, and then he gets sold down the river, doesn't he? By her. In terms of the racism angle, I was surprised when you looked in their bubbles. You know, had that sea of faces, that they were all white, because we're not used to that kind of casting. Doctor Who hasn't been like that for years.
Yeah.
So that struck me as odd. But like you say, you know, you're on a different planet. You know,
Yeah.
it might be a conscious decision that this planet is all white. And even at the
It's
end,
like I mean, just on that point, for example, if you did a story with the Thals now,
yeah,
and the Thals famously are sort of all white, all
Aryan.
blonde, all Aryan, and you're like, if you did a story with the Thals now, would you go for mixed ethnicity casting, or would you keep them all white, all Aryan? Because I don't, see, I think there's a story to be told about the Thals and the Daleks now. There's probably a slightly different one from the ones that were told back in the classic series. And I think there's something really interesting to be teased out of the Nazis versus the Nazis. I think that's the story you can tell about them.
Yeah, that really.
But what I mean is,
I think. Sorry,
the point I was going to make is that if you were to tell a story about the Thals, they'd all be white, they'd all be blonde, right? And so the Dot and Bubble universe felt to me like a repetition of the Thal universe.
Yeah, I don't think they would now. I think there would just be beautiful people of all races, I think.
I think you're probably right.
I think that's how they would do it now, because the point is not that they're Aryan, really, unless you're looking for subtext like that. The point is that they're, what do they call it? Like full circle mutation, aren't they? So
that's right. Yeah.
But yeah, even when it came to the end, when I thought, I think that sort of chilling moment is when she says "you, sir," doesn't she? When and I thought, oh my god, this is going to be about his skin color, and I was kind of hoping it would be his age, because they were so young. And he's got
a Logan's Run thing.
Yeah, and I believe that's a fake moustache, isn't it? He wears because he's trying to disassociate himself from the character from Sex Education, which is supposed to be a teenager, and he was obviously far too old to play, really. But he works because he looks young. So the moustache, I think, it gives him age and gravitas. And I was even up to the point, I thought, oh god, I hope this isn't going to be racist. I hope this is his age, and then it clearly is. It clearly is racism, and I think, it is a bit of a hammer blow, I think. And I've probably thought about this episode more than any of the others since. So I think it is quite powerful.
I just think, though, that Russell T Davies has kind of made, for a program that's aimed at young people, I think there's a reading of this that makes young people the baddies, because there's never any sort of investigation of where racism comes from or how it's passed down from the parents. Yeah, because that's surely got to. It seems to me, it feels like the parents aren't racists, but the kids all are, so they've shuffled them off to another planet because they don't want them around.
It could equally be that.
That would be a terrible story to tell, wouldn't it? So I think as a sort of, just as on a sort of purely aesthetic level, this is a really interesting, dynamic, engaging episode of Doctor Who. But underneath the surface of it, some really ugly stuff.
And it is better than just being, look at these young idiots with their phones, which is what it looked like it was going to be. You think, well, that's just too facile and uninteresting, isn't it? So yeah, I'm kind of glad in a way that it went the way that it did. It's funny, the reaction on social media, all the people trying to say, "Oh, I noticed before you did," kind of thing.
Yeah, a bit like the reveal. No, let's talk about the story that came in second on 68.7%, so just slightly ahead. Boom! Andy Massey votes it fourth. Says great Moffat, bit of the algorithm and greatest hits. Doctor focused, but he still seems behind the curve of the narrative until the end.
Graham Leggett again, third, dropped it a place because of the reuse of love conquers all solution.
Yeah, people often bring that up about Moffat, but I think he does it so differently every time. It's never bothered me at all, frankly. What did you think of Boom, though, Jim?
Yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Yeah, I thought it was a great conceit to have the Doctor on a landmine. It's a few minutes from Genesis of the Daleks spread out into an episode, isn't it? Yeah, I liked it.
I really like the conceit of the ambulances, the war machine being responsible for the war. And if you'd have asked me what came first, the Doctor standing on the landmine or the war machine being responsible for the war, I'd have said the war machine. But actually, it sounds like he just came up with the idea of the landmine and then wrote the rest around it.
To keep the Doctor in one place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Particularly with a Doctor like Ncuti, that's an interesting thing to do because he's so kinetic, isn't he?
Yeah. I really liked that. I thought he gave his best performance of the series.
Yeah, I've always liked him. I liked him in Sex Education. He's my favourite character in that. So I was warm to him before he took the role. And whereas I haven't been particularly excited up to this point by the stories, I always thought he was good. But this is his best performance, certainly up to this point. I thought he's really, really good.
Oh, and what did you make of the fact that we've got next year's companion turning up in a different role?
Yeah, it's a free management job, isn't it? I guess. Because I'm assuming won't be the same character, or maybe it will. But
it's not impossible. People have this thing. People keep repeating this, that they filmed the two series back to back. And if they had filmed the two series back to back, then you would think that the casting had to have been deliberate because it was all being done in such close proximity. But I don't think the two series were filmed back to back. I think they took a 3-month break between filming the first and filming the second. Just exactly. Yeah, so the thing that's happened is that they filmed them a year earlier than we're used to them filming them, but they still filmed them with the 3-month break in between. So it was 9 months of filming, 3 months off, 9 months of filming. So and that being the case, then that makes them two very distinct recording blocks between the two series, which to me makes it more likely that it's just a coincidence of casting, or we liked her, why don't we have her as the next companion, sort of thing, like with Free Mirageman.
Yeah, that seems to me more likely. This is a breath of fresh air. I prefer Moffat Who to RTD Who. It's Moffat trope bingo in here as well, though. I think I counted, not while I was watching, but I think I counted about 6 Moffat tropes by the end of this. Tech that communicates after death, and hospital droids, hospital AI gone wrong, and Father's Love Conquers all that kind of stuff. But RTD's doing his greatest hit, so why shouldn't Moffat? And if we're to believe what he says, this might be the only non-Christmas special type story he does in this era.
And of course, it's 7 years or something since the last time a Stephen Moffat episode was on the telly. So apart from us fans, nobody else is really going to have noticed, are they?
No, and I'm sure nobody even reads who wrote the story when it's on the screen anyway.
No, exactly.
They could have just thought. But yeah, this was standard. I thought, oh right, yeah, we're on course now, because as I say, I didn't like the first two.
What did you make of? So there's been some, you can tell it's filmed in this thing. So they used not the volume itself, but they used something similar to film it all indoors, but with backgrounds that are actually there physically on the sets. A bit like, I suppose, really what it's like is back projection instead of CSO. So it's not. So it's not like it's not there and they put it in afterwards, but it's like it is there at the time, and it's the way the cameras pick it up that makes it look the way it does. I couldn't tell. I thought it looked fantastic. What did you make of all that?
I thought it looked great. Yeah, I didn't look at the behind the scenes stuff, so I didn't know how it was done, but I thought it was very effective. It's certainly better than green screen. They're better at green screen now than they have been. But there are certain things, particularly in the Chibnall era, where there was a weird either sort of colour palette or sheen or something to a lot of the special effects work, the green screen work, which I got a bit sick of after a while.
Oh, really?
I haven't seen any of that in this, and I
wonder if that's sometimes. I wonder if that's sometimes something to do with your telly, because I can't say I noticed that. So
I haven't noticed it on anything else I've watched. So I only noticed it on that era of Doctor Who.
Sure. What I mean is those particular special effects made by that particular company might look slightly different on one telly to another, I guess. I don't know. Sometimes things like that happen, don't they? I've noticed.
Mine's an entry-level 4K, so it's
really,
it's not a particularly good 4K, but it is a 4K. But yeah, you could be right. But I didn't notice that in the last season, this last special of Chibnall. I haven't noticed it anywhere in this season. So.
Chibnall's effects were done by a different company, though, weren't they? Because Russell T Davies has kind of basically gone back to the people he was using first time, unless I'm mistaken. Although obviously things have gone up in the world a lot in the sort of intervening decade or so.
He certainly got the old team back together, hasn't he, in a number of ways?
Has he not? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, let's talk about the story that came in first on 83.7%. So that's 15% it's won by. So, and that is quite huge, actually, especially given that this is a story with barely any Doctor in it at all. And like you say, I think Ncuti Gat was really good. I think sometimes he's a bit guilty of acting, but actually when he is guilty of acting, he's really good. And most of the time, I don't think he is. But for a story that he's not even in, really, to have come top seems a bit. But then again, it's this. So 73 yards. David Ewan says he votes it second. He says, great horror, the scariest, most disturbing episode ever. Folk horror like it should be done. Then he says quite a gap to the next lot. So this was sort of this and the story he voted first, which, if I remember rightly, was Boom, were by far and away his two favourites of the year.
Right. Andy Massey voted it first. Enjoyable and intriguing, and would have worked even better if we actually knew anything about Ruby Tuesday. Ruby Tuesday. Ruby Tuesday, that is.
It's nice. I didn't know you could do Paul McCartney.
Thanks very much.
No, it turns out you can't.
It started with him stepping in some shit again after Boom, and he really needs to look at his feet a bit more. The annoyance was the character didn't evolve from the start to the end, apart from mentioning visiting Wales 3 times rather than 2.
Graham Leggett votes it first, says, because of the spookiness, the pub scene, and Ruby weaponising her own curse, which that scene, I think. I mean, I thought as soon as you went into that, I knew what she was going to do at some point. I think that was pretty obvious from the start, but I still think the way it happened, the bit where she uses the woman to
just
sort of
get next to the politician.
Yeah, exactly. I still think that was a nicely done scene.
That was brilliant moment.
Yeah. So this is a story that actually, just like a lot of the others, if you stop at the end and pull the threads, the entire thing completely unravels. But I think so. This is me laying down this as a sort of. I think if the story takes place in the real world, and when I say the real world, the real Doctor Who world, so Space Babies, Maestro, Devil's Court, whatever, they take place in the Doctor Who universe, so they have to. I think they have to conform to a certain amount of logic. But I think 73 yards, by nature of the fact that it goes into an alternative universe, effectively, I think that takes it into the realm of not needing to conform to that logic necessarily. So I think it gets away with it. So I put this first as well. I said I put my stories in the same order as these.
Yeah.
So obviously I put this first. I put this first because I think the tone and the trajectory of the story are so effective. I, for once, didn't mind the fact that it adds up to absolutely zero at the end. So, Jim, what do you think it matters? Do you think it mattered in this case, I suppose? And what did you make of 73 yards?
I loved it. I voted it first as well. Yeah, I think the magical side of it means that you don't have to worry too much about it. And it's for me, it's an RTD episode, so I don't worry about it until at the end. I just follow it. I just go along with it. I just go on the ride, and then if I want to think about it later and realise there was a few problems, then that often does happen. But I was absorbed by it throughout. I like the scope of it. The fact that it, in terms of location and length of time, because this is a very long story. Because we get to a very old Ruby at the end, which I'm glad they eventually recast at the end, rather than pretending she's going to look exactly the same forever. Which is, it seems to have been a choice. They may give her some glasses and a bad hairdo, and pretend she's 40, sort of thing. But yeah, it's great. I mean, I like I mean, I love folk horror anyway, and I like what they were doing with that. And then it kind of becomes American Werewolf in London, isn't it? In the slaughtered lamb sort
Yeah.
of scene. I liked all that. I like the continual building up the tension and then puncturing it with the
Right.
locals.
Yeah.
I thought that was fun. I mean, it does detract from the overall heft of the episode, but it was worth it for the laughs, I think. So
And it kind of isn't really a folk horror. That's kind of a pretense it makes at the
looks
start
like it's
rather than a
going to be.
promise.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But actually, despite the fact that as a story it kind of goes away from that and goes into politics, I think the thing about folk horror as a sort of genre is that it's about a protagonist who accidentally, but because of their personality, gets a problem of some kind attached to them. So in The Wicker Man, it's all about him because of his personality and where he finds himself. And I think actually, although 73 Yards doesn't conform to most of what you would think of as folk horror, that aspect of it, I think, does. So actually, despite the fact that it goes off and feels like it's gone somewhere else entirely, I think it actually kind of does keep that Wicker Man, this curse has befallen upon you because of who you are thing. So I think in the end, it kind of does conform to the rules, I think.
Yeah, it's a bit of that, and it's a bit of M.R. James, isn't it? Yeah, particularly the imagery of
Yeah, yeah.
like someone in the distance sort of following you everywhere. It's a very like a warning to the curious, isn't it? So yeah, I kind of like the feel. Yeah, maybe not so much folk horror as a ghost story for Christmas kind of thing.
Or the perfect synthesis of the two.
Of the two, yeah, great. I mean, a great moment for Kate Lethbridge-Stewart, I think, when she appears in this. It's a surprise. I didn't know she was coming, and I thought she gave one of her better performances. And the bit at the moment when everyone that Ruby turns to abandons her, and that abandonment felt like one of the worst until we got to Carla, which was ultimately the worst. In terms of what is frightening these people off, I think there's inconsistency there.
I don't know. I think I said this anyway when we reviewed it, but I'll throw it in again anyway. Oh, no, I don't think I did, actually. I don't think it's about what she says. I think everybody thinks it's about what she says. I think it's about the fact that it's the same person in two places at once that's causing a sort of rupture in people's minds. So I think it's sort of a version of the Blinovitch limitation effect-ish.
Well, that's why I think it's inconsistent, because I think that is definitely the case with some of them who just need to be near the woman and freak out. But the reaction of Kate and the reaction of Carla is as if they've found something out about Ruby, isn't it? And I think that's the way they're acted. And I don't think it makes sense for it to be anything other than something they've learned about them.
I think that's because Russell T Davies hasn't put it in the script. So the director...
He hasn't decided what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And doesn't feel he needs to.
Yeah, and I think it just about gets away with it.
I think it does. I mean, this is the only one I watched with my daughter, who's 14 in a couple of months, a 13-year-old, and we really enjoyed it. I mean, to be honest, we started laughing.
She's not knocking on your door and irritating you, is she?
Well, I'd hate to say that's because I'm a better parent, but I think that's fairly obvious.
Unbelievable.
But she was she enjoyed it. I mean, we did get to a stage where we laughed. We've got to the point where we thought, oh, they're going to run away every time someone met the mysterious woman, and we started laughing about it each time it happened after a while, which I'm not quite sure is what they were intended, but it was a fun time for the two of us. But yeah, I mean, she enjoyed it, and she saw the trailer for Dot and Bubble. She said, "I'm not watching that."
Oh, really?
And didn't see any of the rest of the series or the first two.
Oh, that's a shame.
First three.
Yeah, I would love to have known what she thought of Dot and Bubble, but
I think she would have identified the social what do they call them, influencers. Yeah, she does a very good impression of them.
Oh, wow.
She might have enjoyed that.
Yeah, because actually going back to that, that's what you thought it was about, wasn't it? You kind of assumed that the villain was going to be the fact of the influencing in some way, rather than something that felt kind of external in the end. And just to go back to that, I suppose the point of Dot and Bubble is if we make our own social circles, and I suppose this podcast is kind of guilty of that in a way, because we've got a fairly big team, but we're all basically the same person to one degree or another.
Yeah.
But I guess that's just the way you roll. I think it's just. But Russell T Davies seems to be conflating that also with the fact that AI chooses the people you socialize with as well in these things. And I think if he'd have made that point clearer and or made that to blame, but it was almost like the end of the story blamed the people rather than the circumstance. And I would have preferred him to blame the circumstance rather than the people.
Yeah, I mean, you could see this bunch, a bit like the Eloy, only sort of, a bit nastier sort of thing. They're kind of easy prey for this external thing, aren't they? And they're not equipped to deal with, the threat that they face. Yeah, I think that might have been more of a satisfying way of doing it. Yeah.
But I still think. So those three stories, Boom, 73 Yards, and Dot and Bubble, the three that have come head and shoulders above everything else. It's two with barely any Ncuti Gatwa, and one where Ncuti Gatwa is kind of forced onto one spot. So he has his kineticism taken away. Now, our listenership, obviously, is probably made up of people who reflect us a fair bit too, to one degree or another.
Yeah, probably.
So but then again, this is the same order I put them in. I just think this is a fair reflection of the quality of the stories, apart from what's in them. But I wonder if. So I think I made this point last time. I wonder if instead of writing the Doctor and letting Ncuti Gatwa play the Doctor, Russell T Davies is trying to write a particular kind of Doctor that is what he has in his head of Ncuti Gatwa. And I wonder if that's misfiring slightly, and it works better when that's not happening.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, I mean, you always get to a stage, don't you, with the Doctor where you start writing for that Doctor, don't you?
Yeah. And it always seems that the quality sort of, even if it doesn't drop by much, I think the quality always feels like it drops when the actor's too established for people not to be writing for the actor. And I wonder if this has started in that place.
Yeah, it may well have done. Millie was an interesting performance. I mean, she's not a character that you could say, oh, she's like this. You can't think of one or two adjectives to describe her. I don't think that's a problem because, people that you don't just apply one adjective to say, oh, they're like that and nothing else about them is of interest, sort of thing. So I don't mind that. The only thing I wasn't so keen is she's a Coronation Street kid, isn't she?
Yeah.
And I always find Coronation Street is if you watch an episode of Coronation Street and watch an episode of EastEnders, there's more comedy in Coronation Street and there's more misery in EastEnders. However, I find the acting more sort of truthful in EastEnders than I do in Coronation Street, particularly with the younger actors and actresses, because I think you always see a little bit of them acting, and I found that a lot with Millie until really that final scene, when she meets her biological mother, which I thought was superbly acted, actually.
Oh yeah, the bit in the cafe is absolutely amazing. Both of them.
Oh, they're both
good in
brilliant.
That scene. Yeah. I think she was great in Boom as well, actually. In the scenes where it's just her and the Doctor, and he can't do the. I think a weird thing happens. I think Ncuti Gatwa gives a big performance, and I think Millie Gibson's trying to raise herself to where he is. Plus, on top of the fact that you're right, EastEnders has kind of got this naturalism, and Coronation Street has kind of got this sort of slightly caricatured version of human beings. And I think if you start from a place of slight caricature and then try and raise your performance to where Ncuti Gatwa is, I think it takes you into a problematic place.
Yes,
plus, on top of that, I think he's basically just written, but for one or two tweaks, Rose again. And so I think he's kind of said, well, everybody knows who Rose is, so I don't need to give her any character. So there's no character beats. It's a character without any character beats, and we're all just assumed to understand that the character beats that should be there are all the ones that Rose had 15 years ago, 19 years ago.
Yeah. So I mean, even 73 Yards, when you spend the whole episode with her, I mean, it's a nice performance. I like her performance in that. However, what do you learn from her other than she could be kicked in the teeth and carry on relentlessly, because that's what happens throughout. I mean, she's resilient. That's all I knew about her by the end of it, really. And I suppose clever enough to use, the 73 yards to see off the politician, like we said, which is a really nice moment for her. Other than that, I mean, I don't really think I felt I knew her any better after that.
No, in fact, Andy Massey says, doesn't he? He said it would have worked even better if we actually knew anything about the character.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, I've got a 9-year-old telling me it's time we knock this on the head because we've overrun anyway. We said it was going to be 45 minutes, and it's been much longer than that. So let's call it a day. That was the listeners' poll, won by 73 yards. I've heard some other podcasts. I think that might have come as a surprise to some people, but I don't think it came remotely as a surprise to me. I thought it was head and shoulders above the others.
No, me. No.
But there you go. Thanks for joining me in this, Jim.
Oh, you're welcome.
I guess we'll be back. Oh, we were going to come back and talk about A Good Man Goes to War was the next one we chose in the randomizer for our Who Review Extras. But actually, since we've all watched Pyramids of Mars, in one way or another, or a lot of us have, we're going to throw in a quick review of Pyramids of Mars before we come back for A Good Man Goes to War. So maybe you'll be able to join us for that. Until that happens, I was JR.
And I was Jim.
And we will speak again soon.